It all began when I was 3 months old. I'd been put in care because my parents didn't have accommodation back in Jersey for children, really, parents with children that were not Jersey. You had to get qualifications in order to get housing. I think they call it council housing in England. But anyway, my parents didn't have that. So we were put into, I was put into Westway Crash, which I loved. I loved it there. The matron of the home was Mrs. Peacock. She was a qualified matron of children, nurse. She was a nurse. But because I think we had the same sort of colour, and she was ginger and I was sort of gingery blonde, I suppose. Anyway, everyone thought we were mother and daughter. And Mother Peacock, I used to call her later in my life. She was fantastic with me. I can't fault her. And when I left the home, the crash, and went to Hotley Garden, I was horrified.
You were 5 then, were you? Is that true?
Yeah. Yes, I was 5 years old. I remember the warden, hard-nosed face woman, passing me some clothes that was going to be for the week. She said this was going to be my weekly clothing. And then there was a nice little dress that I could only wear on a Sunday. Anyway, she marched me to the where I was going to stay and sleep, which was a massive ward. I can only name it as a ward because there was rows and rows of beds, and each bed had a wardrobe next to it. The guy that ran Hotley Garden was Torbrook. He was. I found out later on, and it fits, I suppose, because he was a military man. He had been through the war. Excuse me. He'd been through the war, and he had learned to treat us like soldiers, I'll say. We had to make our beds like it was like we were in the army. But anyway, he was a nasty piece of man. And
in what way? In what way was he nasty?
He was nasty. He would make you do things to him, and threaten you that you wouldn't have this. You wouldn't have the treat. You wouldn't have the. You would not have your parents, which was my mother, see you for a long time. He was just a nasty man.
This was sexual things you had to do.
I had to do them in order to have these favors, as you call them, because he would never let us see my mother, me see my mother. And my mother walked from St. Helier to St. Martin's, and that's quite a walk, because in those days there was no buses. So I would do them knowing that I would not see my mother if I didn't.
And how old were you when that kind of thing started?
5.
Oh, straight away. Was he the man, Marina, was he the man who would carry a pillow around with him?
Yes.
What was the pillow for?
Oh, to shut you up, my dear. He had his little weasel. A guy would have under his arm, I can't think of his name, but he followed him everywhere. He had like a clipperboard, and he would write down certain things on the clipperboard. I don't know, he followed them everywhere. And Torbrook would use that pillow if you were to scream. He would cover your face. Thinking about it, I mean, I suffer with my breathing now, but as a child, we were terrified. From the girls' dormitory, I told my doctor, about this, where along the corridor from our dormitory, there was a room. It overlooked the field at the back of the home, and it had an arch window. And it had the room was big, it was huge. And thinking about it, it just had one bed in there. I remember being led there, given some drink, I can only assume alcohol, and led to this room, and then being brought back to the dormitory, only to be abused sexually in this room. And I told my counsellor about it. So she investigated. She wanted to see this room, well, especially the window, because it was an unusual window. It was an arch window. So I told her where it was. So she took photographs of it. She went to the home and took photographs of this window. And she was horrified. And I can tell you, I told certain states members of secret doors that led to the basement of Hope Garden, where there was a massive bath. It was always summertime, I suppose. There's a reason for that, the heat. But we, as kids, we were led down steps, believe it or not, to this basement and into baths. I can only describe old members of states members.
States members means people in the government,
yes,
people in the parliament.
Exactly. And I remember that they were mainly farmers, because I remember meeting one of them that worked in Grouville. He was a farmer in Grouville that came with Mr. Paynell, Teddy Paynell. And they used to bring vegetables and things to the home, and even meat. And Mr. Paynell was often with one of the estates members that used to bring this to us. Yeah.
So you'd be led down into the cellars, and there's a pool or a bath?
No, it was like a big pool.
Right.
Yeah, and we were put into the pool by members of staff, mainly women, believe it or not. They would put us into the pool amongst these men.
So how many men were in the pool usually, and how many children were put in the pool with them?
It was about 6 to 8 men that were in the pool. But they had this chair, never forget, they had this chair, it was wooden, and they had where you rest your arms, as a kid. Well, even now, I mean, it's a wooden chair with arms.
Yeah.
And they had straps to it. And if you refused to go in the pool, they put you in this chair. They called it the naughty chair.
And how were you trapped? How were you strapped? What was it? Your hands strapped to the arms, or?
No, it was the ankles and the wrists.
And were you wearing clothes at times like that?
Because I just had a little what we call frock dress on. Yeah, it was just something they could just take off.
And if you're in the pool, would you be wearing something?
No.
And would they be wearing anything?
The men, you mean?
The men, I mean.
No, they never wore anything.
And so what would happen in the pool?
Well, they were drinking and smoking.
And is your memory of that business going down into the cellar, into the pool, of it happening quite often?
I do remember it quite often because it was terrifying. And I remember it wasn't just girls, it was boys as well. It wasn't just girls, it was boys. They often put us in there, and I was often in the chair, which I would refuse to go into the pool.
What would happen in the pool?
They used to make us sit on their laps. Well, not on their laps, I suppose on their laps if they were in the pool. And
when you say make you, Marina, do you mean that they put you on the laps, or that they
put you on the laps,
right,
of these men? They asked us to touch their private parts, yes.
Yeah.
And did the staff members watch this going on, or did they leave and, go back upstairs?
They went back upstairs, yes.
Yeah.
So when this situation comes to an end, what happens? I mean, do they come and get you get the children? Is it kind of like a timed thing, or?
Yes, they come get us, wrap
right.
us in towels, look us off asleep. And I remember going to sleep after it. They would give us a drink and we would fall asleep.
What kind of a drink?
Well, a liquid drink.
I mean, medicine type of drink, or just kind of water?
Like a medicine drink,
oh, right.
Yeah.
Who gave you that? The staff gave you that?
Staff, yes, yeah.
Do you think you were being drugged to go to sleep?
Well, we were all the way through.
What makes you think you were being drugged? What was happening?
Because we felt drowsy after. We felt drowsy
After going down into that pool?
We were given alcohol by staff.
Right.
Yeah. I remember the first time I was given alcohol by the staff, this is just memory, was when it was 1966.
You were how old?
6.
Do you remember, Marina, whether this was the same men who kept returning, or whether there was a constant stream of different men, or a mixture? How many kind of people are we talking about who might have been doing this to children when they attended Haute de la Garenne?
It was the same man. One was a States member. He had a shop in Saint-Helier, and I remember the boys going there, but coming back, you knew by their faces what went on. I came back from London in about 13, and we come back from London, and the girls were saying that they're going on this yacht, and asked if I wanted to go, the staff members, on this yacht. Not being able to swim anyway, and I didn't trust them. I said, no, I don't want to go. But when the girls came back, you knew something happened to them. They'd been abused. There was one girl, she disappeared now. If you were to interview any of the children from Hope Lagoon, they'll tell you the same thing. We never saw her again. And I can see her now. She had been on this yacht. And she came back. She was not long at Hope Lagoon. She jumped out the window, and I thought that's odd because it's not a big height from our dormitory. It was quite I'm saying the most about 12 feet. We never saw her.
You never saw her again?
When I asked Charlie Smith, who was the head of the children's department, what happened to her, he said he didn't know. I said, but you're in charge of the department. Surely you would know. And he said, I don't know. I think she was fostered. But I think he knew what happened to her and to the other children that disappeared.
You've been talked about being touched. Were you actually raped as well, Marina?
Yes. At the home.
Yeah. At what kind of age do you remember that happening?
Around about 8 years old. But I was led up to that, was made to do things to remember, mainly the staff, members of the staff. We were made to do things. Us girls. The boys who were raped at all ages. I remember one boy, he had blood in his pajamas. And he must have been about 6, say. And I asked him what happened, and he wouldn't tell me, but I knew anyway. But I wanted to comfort him. He's now in a mental state, always has been since. And I remember going out, looking out the window and seeing this person hanging from the tree.
Hanging by the neck?
Yeah.
And did you say you were 6 at that point?
Yes, I was 6. I can see him now. He was a boy. He came from Irish parents. And it was the year that the football was on. In fact, we had a black and white TV in the big hall put up for the boys to watch football. Anyway, I went to investigate it, and I was horrified because I was trying to push him up to help him out of the tree. I remember it clearly till I die, I suppose. And I couldn't. So I went to the home and said that there was somebody swinging, explained as you do when you're that age. And I was told that he had, by the kids of the home, that he had killed himself.
Tell us about the Beast of Jersey. What was tell us about that.
He came to Hope Lagoon with his best pal, LeMH, and they would bring things like vegetables that the Beast of Jersey would grow on his farm, and so would LeMH bring other items, mainly for the staff. When Christmas came, that the Beast of Jersey would give us the presents that people of the island donated to us kids back in the day. I was horrified because Santa Claus was a jolly, rosy-cheeked guy, and he was ugly.
Did he abuse you, Marina?
Yes, he did. He did. Not sexual, but felt me in places.
That sounds sexual.
It was sexual, but it was. He was only caught. I remember he was only caught because he speeded through traffic lights, and he stopped by the States of Jersey police. Now, this is not the honorary police officers,
No.
this is the States of Jersey.
Yeah.
He stopped and he searched. That's where they found these items of things that he had in his boot of his car.
What kind of things
Well,
would he have had?
He had like a dog collar with, just kind of nails coming out of it. He had wristbands, the same thing, nails coming out, quite sharp nails. He just.
Am I right? He came as Father Christmas. Did he wear a Father Christmas outfit?
Oh, he did. He did. I mean, I'm telling you now, he was most ugly as Father Christmas had.
but he then also came as the Beast of Jersey wearing a spiky collar and cuffs.
Exactly, yeah. Well, once you see an ugly face, you don't forget it, do you?
It is
a pretty face.
Was that his? Funny question, Marina. But was that his actual face, or did he have a mask?
No, he didn't need to have one.
He was ugly enough. Who else came to visit your home? Were there other celebrities or
Jimmy Savile?
He said he never came to
Jersey.
Well, Jimmy Savile came in the 70s. I remember him clearly. He was on Jimmy Fix It, or whatever they used to follow. And he came quite often because his mother was in a home that was run by the sisters convent. He came to Hope because he wanted us to do the Easter charity walk. But he was abusive to the girls. He would touch them sexually. And I didn't like that when my sister was sitting on his lap. Well, we both were. And he started touching us in certain places. And I said to my sister, let's go, let's move. And we did. But he denied ever going to Hoboken. My sister was photographed with Jimmy Savile on one of the fields that was at the back of the home, Hope LeGarren. And he denied ever going to Hope LeGarren. He said that he never went there. But I remember that there was photographs taken, and I told the police that he's in photographs with my sister and some of the teenagers from Hope LeGarren, because they all wanted to be on Jimmy Fix It. What happened to me, I've got to put behind me for the sake of my life. So that's what happened. I just put it behind me, but my sister never did. She and my brother didn't. One of my brothers, they drank a lot. They'd become alcoholics. My sister ended up on the streets of Jersey. My brother, he drank a lot, but he had his painting and decorating business, so that kept him off the streets, basically. My sister, I often pulled off the streets of St. Helier. I said to her, you've got to move from here. Anyway, she married a Jersey guy, but she found the booze was better than him. So she left him and went to England. She is now living in, Bristol, but she got cancer of the throat.
When did you leave Jersey?
I left Jersey last year. When Gladwell came to Jersey, he asked me to go and identify anything that was found at Hope Garden. And I asked him about that pool, and that I led certain state members to the basement of Hope Garden, and he denied that it ever was there. And I said, well, what about the wall? We, as children, we wrote out, I couldn't read and spell very well, but I put my initials, MC, Marina Crammon was my name. And he denied anything that he found. And I later found that he destroyed everything that was found at Hope Garden.
That's the police officer, isn't it, you're talking about?
Officer, yes. He was corrupt to the core, and you can record this from Marina. And I told him, you're corrupt. You are a nasty piece of work, and you'll go to hell for what you've done. Now, there was a states member, I'm going to ask Michael his name, I can't remember his name, but he and him and another person went to investigate this swimming pool that they used to put us in. And the states member said, well, you can't stand up. Because in 1972, the Hope Garden had an extension built onto it to make it bigger, obviously. And the part that Hope Garden had the extension built on, you could not stand up to because the level of the ceiling was brought down. But the actual old building, you could. Mr. Talbrook went on to run a children's home for handicapped children, I believe in Yorkshire.
After he'd left Garen?
He would have done, I think, the same to those, but who are they going to call?
So did he go with a kind of clean bill of health then being given to him by whoever employed him?
Yeah, he was employed by the Children's Department, which was the States of Jersey Department.
Right.
Amazing.
Now, he went on, I found out later by the police, to run a children's home for the mentally handicapped.
I must have been out of my mind because when I first started looking at it, I thought, right, this will take a few months to investigate and I'll write my thing and then I'll be done. I've just never seen something that has so much bottomlessness to it. It's an embarrassment of riches, as we say in journalism. And I found the whole story to be endlessly fascinating because there were so many different phases of either trying to conceal what had taken place or explain what had taken place, or there was the child abuse inquiry that followed a few years later. So really understanding the whole story, not just, a headline. The Queen certainly has the control here, but I suspect that because she's such a stickler for tradition that a lot of things that could be done to make this better are just simply not done because they've never been done. And so the island is quasi-feudal. It is, it's supposed to be a democracy, but it's mostly the Queen's Island run by the Queen with some small nods to the idea of democracy without actually following through on them. And it's not like it became this way. A lot of people say, oh, well, how did this all happen? And you have to say, it's always been this way there. It's not that it became this way. It was this way. And it's made it ideal it's ideally suited to be a tax shelter, because there's this supreme control being wielded over it by a very small number of people, many of them very wealthy and very connected to the banking, finance, and legal industries over there. And it's a very convenient offshore shelter for England, for people in the Middle East. You'll see a lot of money coming from the Middle East and also Europe. And so it's a highly protected, tiny island with just so much money, $2 trillion of money by some estimates, it's literally like a 5 by 9 mile island, right? It has its own laws and its own everything else. And so it's locked up real tight. There's nothing that's going to get in or out that isn't pre-approved and agreed upon. And so somebody like me, or police officers investigating something and really doing a real investigation, or a member of parliament on the island who's trying to get to the bottom of something, that's considered a very big deal and must be stopped a lot of the time. And that's what makes it so astounding. If somebody had described this to me, I wouldn't have believed it if somebody had told me about it before I looked at it myself.
What's the main motivation, Leah? Is it because they're worried about the reputation of the island as a tax haven, so they just cannot admit that there might be any abuse of children going on, or is there something else as well? Do you have an idea?
Yeah, they don't want to risk the reputation of the island, but I will say I think it's even more serious than that. The island, I received a number of documents this last year that shows that the island is a very serious site for, unbelievable money laundering. But, a lot of the papers that you can get from some of those, there's some really great information available now from some of the money laundering leaks that have taken place. And so this one leak that I was the recipient of this past year, it shows so much flowing through the island, with the island's judges actively involved, and some of them crown officers actively involved. And we're talking, global money laundering, we're talking arms deals, we're talking the kinds of stuff that is, traditionally known as the quote unquote second economy, which is child trafficking, arms dealing, drug dealing, money laundering, the really dark stuff, and the stuff that has so much money going through that if you're making that kind of money, you don't want it to stop. People who often would have a sort of organic situation that would grow around a corrupt situation, where you'd have friends and colleagues, and as time passed, and sometimes even decades, you had multiple people more or less involved or with knowledge of what was happening, but not really doing anything about it. And frankly, that would often come from initially from profiting off of it. But then over time, these human relationships would develop around it as well, where you wouldn't want to betray somebody, even if you knew what you were doing was wrong. And so I became very interested in how these institutional or systemic circles or societies or groups engaged in corruption, how they developed. So I think Jersey, it wants to have that really nice external reputation, but the thing is down the middle, under the surface, this stuff is really dark. And I think it likes the idea of having both, because that second economy is highly lucrative. Like, it's a huge amount of money.
Yeah.
The money that we see is only part of what's happening in the world today. So it's the stuff we're not seeing. Well, where is it going? Well, it's going to places like Jersey that have total control over what's happening on the island. And so they certainly have an incentive to protect that if they want to keep that money coming through. They also want to be known as an island that is polished and professional. But when you look under the surface, a lot of times its own regulator will not apprehend fraud. Its own police officers will not investigate crime. Its own crown officers will make excuses about why everything's fine. And the members of parliament will be kept completely in the dark. So often I'll talk to somebody, and there was a global scandal last autumn about money laundering on the island. None of the members of parliament knew about it because no newspaper on the island would report on it. You had global newspapers all around the world writing about it, and nobody on the island even knew. Felt like the only way to get to the truth would be to start just investigating quietly and see what I could find. No other international journalist was giving it consistent year by year attention. I think a lot of those journalists were prepared to just write a story and go home. And the story kept changing in ways that didn't make a whole lot of sense.
No.
They were being told one day that children's remains were found, and then immediately someone would be trying to spin that in the other direction. And as you saw in the film Garen that we worked on, there was a scene with a journalist saying, how could we have children's remains and now we don't?
Yeah.
Like, how can it be that there's this happening and then suddenly it's gone?
Well, the reason we had to do what we did was because the media just wouldn't touch it. The way Jersey is, we only have one newspaper, obviously, in Jersey, and although the media is pretty sewn up, it's establishment. The establishment run the media. It's through whether it be like the advertising and financial. And Jersey is a very close knit community. You just don't put your head up above the parapet because you're going to get shot if you do. So hence no one was going against the mainstream narrative. And that was, again, Neil and I were like, right, we're going to do something. And if we're going to do it, we are going to do it properly. We're not trained journalists. I've got to make, we come from, it's not my job. I just work in a shop, but you think, right, you're going to try and do the right thing. And that's.
Did that mean that you started talking to people to find out the story, or was it that you already kind of really knew an awful lot?
No, I didn't. In 2008, I didn't even know how my island operated. I didn't even know the politics of the island. I knew there were constables and all the rest of it, but I had absolutely no interest in how Jersey was run. I had to learn. I remember Deputy Tadier taking me to a state sitting, and we're sitting up in the gallery, and then explaining to me exactly how my parliament worked. I didn't have a clue, but I had to know if I was going to do what I did. I had to know everything.
Yeah.
So I had to teach myself a lot of things. I didn't even know how to write. When I came to do the blogs and doing forums, I had to expose myself in that I hadn't written since I was at school, and through my work, you just lose that skill. So I just thought, oh my God, I'm going to make a right fool of myself here because I can't even put a paragraph together. I don't know how to structure anything, but that can't stop me from getting my. So I thought, let's just go for it. And Neil was great for that because Neil helped me loads. But it was a lot of work, and I think go on then.
And did you notice a reaction at all, or were you just blogging into a vacuum, into a kind of
start with at the
into
very
space?
least?
When did you notice a reaction? And what did you notice?
When I was blogging on forums, well, then you've got like this little group that are on the forum, and you've got those for and those against. I only realised the audience when I started blogging, which was in April or June 2010. That's when Neil finally said to me, right, Rico, you're blogging. And I said, yeah, okay, I'm going to open a blog. And then because of the functions on the blog, like your audience counters and everything like that, I could actually see. I remember the first time I blogged and 25 people clicked on my blog. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. But it fires you up, and you think, well, what someone's reading what I'm putting out there, you know.
Yeah.
So and then, well, then the audience just grew and grew and grew.
And could you tell whether people were on the island or were they elsewhere? Could you tell?
No, I could. It was telling me, but it was coming from outside of the island, a lot from America, France, and it was. The internet was very raw back then, you know. So the tools were great because everybody, you know, we were all kind of learning on the spot. You know, we weren't doing podcasts, or there was none of that. So it was an amazing tool, and but Neil had been doing it a lot longer than I had. So you know, I was just getting shown what to do. It was quite easy for me, but Neil had to learn obviously on his own, and I found it quite easy, really.
So were you talking regularly and finding out what each of you were doing? And
Neil was the wife. I referred to Neil as the wife, but when we were doing this, we were just constantly in each other's pockets for, I'd say, 8 years. Constant, yeah.
What got you started, Neil?
Sorry?
What got you started?
Well, again, it was, you know, pretty much what Rico was saying. I was aware of, before Operation Rectangle, the child abuse police investigation, I was aware of the media covering stuff up, the establishment covering up stuff. And then when Rectangle came along, I knew that, in fact, it was Stuart Sivray who was speaking out against it, the former, he was the health minister at the time, if I remember. And you could just see there was going to be a cover up. And I got Stuart blogging because he was getting such bad press all the time on the mainstream media. I said, you need to start up your own blog, Stuart. I said, you know, I've got one running, and I showed, you know, I got him set up with a blog. And, you know, we got to always remember is our blog should never have existed. You know, there should have been no need for us, and we can't get away from that. Like, it is only, like Rico said, we're not educated. You know, I left school at 15 without any qualifications, but the media were not only not interested, they were just campaigning against anybody who spoke up and spoke out against the child abuse, including Lenny Harper, Graham Power, Stuart Sivray, the Pittmans. You know, so we thought we have to do something. And it was great when Rico came along because there was so much to report on, you know, so much. And it was just too much. I couldn't do it all. Like, you know, Stuart's blog was going, and there were other blogs going. It wasn't just our two, like, you know, Tony's Musings, Polo, Stuart, Trevor Pittman. But it was just too much work. So Rico lifted a load of weight off of my shoulders by saying, he'd say, right, I'll do the Graham Powell stuff.
And then we knew we were making a difference when, you know, the mainstream media, like the Guardian, you know, in the UK, and that were contacting us wanting to do spreads, and then finding out that they weren't, you know, they actually wanted to do a very nice balanced piece and all that. So, you know, we would help. If anyone came, we would, and, you know,
well, it was only the national media that took any notice of us, you know, and we've done something in the Guardian, I think the Express, and I can't remember. There's a few, you know,
some online publications and that.
So, yeah, you know, because the mainstream media were just saying, look, we're conspiracy theorists, liars, and all the rest of it. But the only acknowledgement we got was from journalists off Ireland.
Yeah.
You know, which was good, you know, it was good back then.
The professional policing, I can't remember, it might be 50 years or so it's been there, but it doesn't have a long history. The traditional system of policing in Jersey, which goes back 800 years or thereabouts, is an honorary system that each of the 12 Jersey parishes can elect a police force. So you can be elected. If you go back to traditional model, you're elected constable of a parish, and that automatically gives you a seat in the parliament, and you are the father of the parish. You're the chief prosecutor for the parish, you're the head of the policing, and you sit in the parliament, and you could be a member of a government. And centenniers, next level down, centenniers are the people who decide whether anyone's going to be prosecuted or charged or not. They would come out to the police station if someone's been arrested and charge a person. Professional police can't charge anybody. And the centennier might say, send this person to a parish hall inquiry. You can have an informal hearing at the parish hall. You don't get a conviction, but you end up paying £50 to parish funds or something like that. Or I'll take this one to court and the centennier will present the case. And at the bottom level, constables, officers and vanteniers would actually do police work. They'd have uniforms, police cars, and would be a visible presence in the parish and deal with your minor nuisances, your local lads and things like that. Stray cattle, we're always getting stray cattle in Jersey, they deal with that. And they're very good at events. If you want traffic controlling, you don't do very good at that. But the legal theory was that they're in charge, that we existed in order to support them.
Right.
And that was a source of tension. And I felt, a lot of people felt that rather had to be the other way around. And I did a lot of work, but got into a lot of confrontation, I suppose you'd have to call it, over getting that balance right. And we did eventually get a partnership agreement, but it caused a lot of tension. There were genuine concerns. I know my predecessor was a good man. He was a local Jersey man, but he wasn't. His heart was in professional policing. I mean, he had concern about recruitment standards. I mean, they recruited a paedophile. That's just simple fact. He's a good honorary police officer, yes, but he's got convictions for sexual offences against young people.
And everyone knew that. Everyone knew that, and they still.
Well, we knew it, and they knew it. They were told. And
right.
The Attorney General of the time was told, because I've seen the letter, though the Attorney General of the time said that he'd never crossed his desk and someone else must have dealt with it. I'm sorry to say, because I really like the person concerned, but I find that unconvincing. There was a lack of only went on to commit further offences. Roger Holland was his name. While he was an honorary police officer, and he went to jail. But questions, how on earth did that person, and the professional, the state's police position, well, we told you not to do it, and you did it. So it's down to you. Firearms licensing was another example. It was imposed on the island effectively after Dunblane. So they agreed to a firearms licensing system, then didn't do it. And so parishes took the money from people's firearms licenses, but didn't do any administration. So people moved, and the conflict of interest in a Conatab, who was the head of a parish, the firearms licensing authority, the head of prosecutions. I mean, quite lightheartedly, to sort of explain this compromise, I gave an example to the committee of inquiry. There was a Conatab in a parish who authorised himself to have quite a large collection of firearms. He issued himself with a licence. Then he moved house and didn't notify himself of his change of address, which meant that the records weren't updated. And where those guns were now, that there was no trace. They became lost in the system. This was drawn to his attention, but he'd broken the law by not recording a change of address, and he considered it, but decided not to prosecute himself. Well, honorary policing was a route into politics. A very substantial number of people who were in the Parliament had former honorary policing connections. And that network of relationships sort of ran through the island, and a lot of old Jersey families, sometimes interconnected families, that went back a long way. And you've got to look at the interrelationships. I mean, the head of a prosecution, the Attorney General, is also the chief prosecutor, but he's also the senior legal advisor to the government and sits in the Parliament. I mean, that is compromise. He will say, and it's always a he in my time, but he will say, yes, but I'm a man of integrity and I do this job impeccably. And if there's any perception that I could be conflicted in any way, I'll send it to an advocate in the UK and get an independent legal. And all of that's true. But all right, I can understand that. I mean, I'd say, yeah, but who picks these advocates? And what happens to an advocate, a barrister in the UK who keeps giving you an opinion you don't like? You know, and there's all sorts of questions. I mean, it also suffered from a very distinct, and I might have talked about this in the Committee of Inquiry, Jersey characteristic, which I think is sometimes present in some European countries in relation to EU rules. And that is, if something came along that they felt, because of international expectations and what have you, that the government had to agree to, then they would quite often agree to it, then not do it. I mean, that was you know, a thing that they did. Oh yes, we'll sign up to that. I suppose we really must. There, you had police officers, politicians, drug dealers, money launderers, lawyers, journalists, and all the rest who went to school with each other, sometimes related to each other, and trying to deal with professional compromise and conflicts of interest was always very difficult. I got into an issue with one custody sergeant about, look, you've kept somebody in custody when there's an argument you should have given him bail, and he's your brother-in-law who assaulted your sister or something like that. You know, shouldn't you have given that decision to somebody else? Well, he said, if you had to get somebody else every time you've got to take a decision to someone we're related to, you know, we'd be doing it all the time. I went to school with these people. You know, I know the families, and okay, this is not Birmingham or Sunderland. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm the only custody officer on duty. Do I really get somebody out of bed to say, will you take this decision instead of me, or something like that? Yeah. I mean, I don't think his argument was a strong one, but that was part of the fact. Is you've got to keep, you're dealing with people all the time, but you know, and you know you and knew what you were like as a lad and what you got up to and that sort of thing. And you can't take people out of that. They'll all back each other up. They'll all lie. They'll all cover up. People believed and still believe that the island is run by a closed shop, a network of people who all look after each other. And if you're an ordinary person, you stand no chance of breaking through the system. That's the belief. It's not just what Francis Oldham, QC, found, these perceptions of the Jersey way. It's also what opinion polls have found. Subsequently, the state's statistics department has polled people on confidence in the various services that the government provides. And criminal justice has a very low perception in terms of integrity and impartiality. Certainly, the majority of people don't trust the criminal justice system. And I think at one poll I saw it was as high as 75% distrusted the criminal justice system. You know, and I was asked about it at the time, I think, privately. I said, I just can't work out who these 25% are, but actually think it.
Very early on, we met resistance from politicians who didn't want us tackling the corruption issues, tried to stop us. It transpired later when the abuse investigation started that one of the reasons for that was that the officers who were indulging in the corrupt behaviour were really very close friends, confidants of the politicians who were trying to block the inquiry. They were in each other's pockets. And I didn't realise that at the time, but it transpired later on that that was the case. So they didn't really want us turfing their friends and their inside men out of the police. And they started waging what can only be described, I suppose, as a propaganda war with us. And the difficulty with the media in Jersey is that the local media were run by the government. Even the BBC bowed and scraped to the whims of the, even the BBC, they haven't quite got the reputation that they used to have, the BBC now, but in Jersey it was magnified 100 times that they were, they and Channel TV, which is a sort of equivalent of ITV, were under the thumb the Jersey states, the government. And this was even more apparent in the Jersey Evening Post, because you had Frank Walker, who was the chief minister in Jersey, had a huge financial interest and a huge amount of power among the editorial staff of the Jersey Evening Post. This had repercussions in other areas as well, when people who were accused of serious sexual offences, who were in senior positions in the Jersey Evening Post, were just allowed to act with impunity. We had to engage in several types of subterfuge to get around that. And again, probably the most blatant example was an officer who was in cahoots with a bent, corrupt vehicle contractor. A lot of complaints are arriving on my desk that one particular contractor was getting about 95% of the work on the island, and it was a really lucrative policy for him. And
this was going to break down rescue service for motorists.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. And he was getting 95% of the work, and the other contractors on the island were absolutely seething, and they'd complained and complained and complained, but nothing had ever been done about it. So we took it on, and we mounted an operation, and we put the police officer who we knew was acting corruptly. We put a microphone, audio equipment into his car, and the car that he was using on patrol. And we did it so we could use it evidentially. You can't always use things like telephone taps and the rest of it. You cannot use in evidence. But we did this in such a way that we could use it in evidence. And we recorded him. And we had him on tape. And we had him on tape when people asked for contractors. He was just calling this guy. So what we did is we ordered him not to take his mobile phone, because he was using his mobile phone to ring this contractor. We ordered him not to take his mobile phone. So we took the mobile phone off him when he was on patrol, and he got what's known, I think, colloquially as a burner phone.
A burner phone, yeah.
He was using that. And eventually we trapped him. The last straw came whenever he also had a sideline with this contractor that Jersey's plates could be used as cherished plates, and some of them, because of the way they were very, very valuable, thousands of pounds. And the last straw came when he dug out one of these number plates, gave it to the contractor, and then in arrangement with the contractor, he went along and knocked on a member of the public's door who owned the number plate, totally innocent member of the public, and told him that he had evidence that he was driving whilst disqualified, and he was driving while he was drunk, and started putting pressure on him, and it was all very unsavory. And eventually we arrested him, and we had loads of evidence, as you can imagine, with the audio equipment. But we needed the Attorney General's permission to charge a police officer with a serious crime. And he withheld that permission. He said it wasn't in the public interest. So what I did was I charged the officer with something like 140, what the Americans would call misdemeanors, which I didn't need.
Minor offences.
Which I didn't need the Attorney General's authority for, and took him to the magistrates' court. Problem was, the magistrate who was hearing the case later became the Home Affairs Minister, and he was an arch enemy of mine as well, because he was complicit in the he was complicit in the child abuse cover-up, and he found him guilty only of 2 offences, but it was enough for us to sack.
So you could get rid of him.
He got acquitted of 138 offences or something, and got convicted of 2. But that had 2 effects. One, it got rid of a corrupt officer, but it ended the relationship between the Attorney General and myself. The corrupt contractor then waged a 4-year war against myself, threatened to burn my house down, sent me a letter threatening to burn my house down.
He didn't sign it, though, did he?
Oh, yes, he did.
He signed it?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's normally an offence, I think, isn't it?
Nothing was done about it, and we we had police officers guarding my front door for a little while, and but when we passed them, I remember one day we lived right on the north of the island on a beautiful little beach, and to get away from that, we sort of went up this hill. And I remember one day, my wife was in the car with me, and we were going up the hill, and this contractor was coming down. And as he came down towards us, as he was passing us, he went, don't know, let me see if I can get this in.
Get it on the camera. No. With his gun. He did a gun gesture at you.
Oh my goodness.
And my wife said, "Who's that?" And said, well, you don't want to know. You don't want to know. The first real big crunch was the firearms, and that came because it came quite accidentally, actually. The man in charge of the police firearms department was a civilian, and we got the detectives were interviewing somebody that they'd arrested for something. I can't remember what it was now, but he said to them during the interview, "What are you talking about?" He says, "Why don't you do something about your own corruption?" He says, "and your own firearms." He says, "Nobody in this island has got licenses for firearms, and your firearms man who's in charge of your firearms is buying and selling firearms. He's taking firearms off members of the public and selling them to other members of the public." And this was brought to me, and I thought, so as it was an internal inquiry, and anti-corruption was at that stage was my main responsibility. And so we got a search warrant, and we decided we'd go and search his house. And I'm going on this search warrant. We go into this estate, and I said to the constable who was driving the van, "Which house is it?" He says, "Sir, you can't miss it. It's got a Sea-Cat missile launcher on top of the roof." And then we turned around the corner, and there was this semi-detached house.
Semi-detached house. Goodness, yeah. The neighbours didn't mind.
It was a housing estate. It was one of these modern housing estates, and on the porch, sitting on top of the porch, was a Sea-Cat missile launcher. So we knocked at the door.
You knocked politely on the door, I hope.
and he answered the door, and he says, "Oh, hello, boss." And so I explained, and his 3-year-old son came out behind him, and the 3-year-old son was holding a huge Magnum revolver in his hands.
I don't know why we're laughing.
And the boy could hardly lift it. It was one of these ones that Clint Eastwood used to use in the Dirty Harry films. Remember the size of it?
Yes.
And we went in and we searched the living room first, and we found a holster underneath. And then we went into the spare room. I could not believe my eyes. There was no room for anything. And the young boy was in this room. There were bullets lying all over the floor. You couldn't see a space of the floor for rifles, guns, machine guns. They were all there. And they weren't light caliber weapons. They were heavy snipers' rifles. There were all sorts lying about this house. And in amongst it all was an RPG-7 rocket launcher. I said, "What are you doing with an RPG-7 rocket launcher?" And he says, "Well, I collect them." He says, "But it can't be fired. It can't." But when we checked it later on, all it needed was a little replacement pin, and it was perfectly serviceable. I had a good friend who was a senior special branch officer in Northern Ireland, and I telephoned him later that night and says, "How many RPG-7 rocket launchers have you recovered during the Troubles?" And he says, "I think we've only got 2 during the whole of the Troubles." I said, "Well, I've just found one in Jersey tonight." And so we took all and he didn't have licenses or certificates for any of them. And the thing was that the professional police were not responsible for licensing firearms. We had no say in the matter. We couldn't decide who had a firearms certificate and who didn't. That was the responsibility of the honorary police. So we took this guy back, And we charged them with a host of offences: illegal possession of firearms, loads of discipline, and so on. But the Attorney General refused to prosecute him.
You keep saying that. You keep using those words.
To begin, and then he agreed to charge him. He agreed to charge him with a couple of fairly minor offences, and he did, and he pleaded guilty. And we sacked him. So we thought, well, that's okay. All's well that ends well. We'll get rid of him. But then he appealed, and we were ordered to reinstate him again. The Home Affairs Minister ordered us to reinstate him again.
That's amazing.
So he came in, and I said to him, I shall be on your shoulder the whole time you're in here. And should you even step out of line 1 iota, I will be down on you. Anyway, a couple of months later, he's at it again. He's using our systems for corrupt purposes and delving in firearms. So I arrested him again and disciplined and charged him again, but this time he resigned. And the postscript of the story is he resigned and applied to join the Honorary Police.
I bet he got a job too, did he?
He did, yeah. And the head of the Honorary Police, is the Attorney General. And he has the final say on who gets in. So when I got wind that this guy was supposed to be sworn into the Honorary Police in a couple of days' time, I created Merry Hell, and I sent a report off the Attorney General, hinting, not saying that I would, but hinting that somebody might leak this to the national media. And his application was delayed, and until about 2 days after I left the island, when he was appointed as an honorary police. It was the arrogance. This was it. That was the arrogance. Yeah. They had been bulletproof for so many years because the victims, go back to the child abuse inquiry again, the victims of the child abuse had been making complaints to the police and the legal and the law officers and the social services for so many years, and they'd just been bounced about. In fact, on a number of infamous occasions, vulnerable victims were taken into a room with the prosecutors, defence lawyers, social workers, the law officers and the investigating police officers, and told in no uncertain terms they were to drop charges and bullied into dropping charges. And there was just no way out for them. And such was the arrogance and the corruption amongst these politicians and this handful of police officers that they just felt that they were bulletproof.
Over and over again, hundreds of people were abused in Jersey institutions run by the Jersey government, and the committee of inquiry, the judge found there was, forget the precise words, but no political interest in the welfare of vulnerable children. The government was a negligent parent. It did not get on the interests of vulnerable children, did not get on the political radar, in spite of there being reports and advice from external experts that there was a real problem in Jersey and something needed to be done. It didn't get registered. The Victoria College produces the young men who go on to be in positions of authority in Jersey. There was a master who was abusing boys, doing it quite, as I recall, on a yacht that he would take out on weekends or whatever. And it eventually came to the notice of the police, but the attitude of the school authorities was very relaxed about it. And it was very clear that they weren't welcoming to a police investigation. And even parents were clamouring for Jarvis Dyke, but he's such a that's the name of the man. He's such a good maths teacher. You know, we don't want to lose him over this. We could. I mean, the sleepiness of the attitude was quite astounding. One of the officers in the case made a statement in which he is adamant that the term "perk of a job" was used. The chairman of the board of governors at the time was a person who later went on to be Attorney General, bailiff, and senior judge. And I say that not to place any necessarily blame on him, but to say that, you know, this is an example of the sort of hierarchy and how it reaches into high places. officers investigating report that they were impeded, that evidence went missing, that they got little support from senior officers. And I took the file. It happened before my time, but at some stage I took the file and sent it to an independent lawyer in the UK for an opinion. And because of these stories of obstruction and difficulty in non-cooperation, and I said, would you just give me an opinion? Should I be doing anything more about this? But it's years old. That's the problem. It's about 10-year-old or something now. And I got an opinion which said, it looks as if there were attempts to impede justice in the Victoria College case. And there are people who could have been interviewed under caution regarding what they did or didn't do in relation to this. But they'd probably argue now that the case has been closed and it would be an abusive process to come to, and probably they'd win that argument in court. It started off, I mean, neither myself nor any of the senior officers, Lenny Harper, any of us, are saying, oh, we spotted this and we realised we need development inquiry. No, we weren't clever enough, or we weren't close enough to the ground to realise this problem existed. But an officer fairly well down the rank chain, I think is detective inspector, so he had something about him. It was a bit like Oliver Twist and the Short Straw, or whatever it is, but he must have drawn the short straw because he put together a report that said, dear sir, you ought to know that we are picking up a lot of stuff about Haute de la Garenne, and there is sufficient to launch a historic abuse inquiry, and I think it's time the force did something about it. That report was submitted through a chain of command, and it went missing for 12 months. It didn't reach our desk, and eventually someone plucked up the courage to come to the top corridor, I think spoke to Lenny Harper, and said, is anything going to happen about that report about historic abuse of Haute de la Garenne? What report? I've never seen it. Lenny, I wasn't told about this initially, but I think it was Lenny that then said, right, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. And inquiries were made, and it was found on a corner of somebody's desk or in somebody's drawer, with nothing having been done about it. We called in an outside force, I think it might have been South Yorkshire, I'm not sure, to investigate that. And I think the inquiry failed to find sufficient evidence for anyone to be charged with concealing that. But I think we were left with a clear picture of what happened. So we got the report, and 12 months after we should have got it, we started acting on it. This did not come from the top of the force. It came from good Jersey officers down at the coalface who said, you've got a problem here, and it's about time the bosses spent less time didn't say, no, it's about time the bosses did something about it. I mean, we had to take sides, and we're taking sides with the victims and the people who got a story to tell. We're on their side. And Lenny Harper in his style has his critics, but one thing by positioning himself, whether on purpose or not, I mean, get him to talk about this, but positioning himself as effectively the enemy of a Jersey government, which is what he became, I suppose. I mean, they decided to make an enemy of him, actually was valuable to the inquiry in a sense that it persuaded many people to come forward. People would say, well, I've been sitting on this for years, but no one was ever going to do anything till he came along. And it, because we've broken, it's a society of us and them. And people saying, I would never trust. And even during the inquiry, people say, okay, after 30 years, I'm willing to make a statement, but I'm not making it to a Jersey officer. I want one of these people you brought in from the UK to take my statement, because I just still don't trust them. I still don't trust them. They're all part of the system. And the climate of fear. Don't worry, we'll get you for this. The judge mentioned the climate. People gave evidence of the climate of fear, but if you step out of line, they'll get you at some point. You know, I mean, I used to work for an old detective sergeant, middle of CID, who once said to me, "Look, if you're really stuck, try doing what's right." And that's just the right thing to do. I looked at it, I thought, oh, blow this. I mean, these hundreds of people screaming out for justice or at least some recognition, and these horrible, rich, slimy individuals want me to put a lid on it. Oh, which side? God, it's not a hard choice, is it?
There was a lawyer on the island who was, although he was working for the Attorney General's office, there were 3 lawyers attached to police headquarters as sort of liaison officers. They were sort of our CPS, if you like. That would be the sort of nearest the equivalent. And they were very, very good people. They were very good lawyers, and they all, at least 2 of them, I think, 2 of them were from the United Kingdom. I can't remember about the third one. I think she was local. Didn't have a lot to do with her, but the 2 lawyers that I worked with mainly were from the UK. And one of them in particular, lovely, lovely guy, he would say to me frequently, I fear there's a paedophile ring operating on the island because I cannot get prosecutions for child abuse cases. It keeps getting bumped back to me. And the Attorney General's office just refused to prosecute. The evidence is there. I know he says the evidence is there. And he said, I'm just a bit worried about it. And he says that, so I agreed to have a look at a lot of old files that he had gone through. And I did. I went through and I was quite horrified by what I saw. And I was also disturbed by a number of occasions that 2 senior police officers seemed to be involved in evidence going missing or evidence not being found, and it just didn't seem right. So we went to Graham, and Graham decided that we should set up a covert inquiry at that stage. And we did. And we told everybody that it was, we let everybody believe, we didn't exactly say, but everybody knew there was something going on because we'd taken a small team of detectives from the force and put them into this secret office, and we're working on it. And everybody thought it was a corruption investigation. And we allowed them to think that. We allowed them to think that. And it was chugging along, and we were making our inquiries and doing it very quietly. But then we got wind that Stuart Sivery was bringing a BBC journalist and a camera crew team to the island. Stuart had been doing some work for the victims, trying to raise issues of child abuse as well, but he was working parallel to us. He didn't know we were investigating, and as far as he was concerned, the police weren't interested.
He was a minister, wasn't he?
Yes, he was a senator.
He was the Home Affairs. He was a health minister whose life was later ruined by the Jersey Mafia. And he was trying to raise this issue, and he was bringing a camera crew. Now, at this stage, we thought if the balloon blows on this, it's going to frighten witnesses off. And so we decided we would have to go public. But what I did was I got Stuart in the evening before we were going public. And I hadn't even told the Home Affairs. I hadn't told the Chief Minister yet, and we hadn't told the Home Affairs Minister. And or maybe we had told Wendy. I'm not sure. I can't recall. But anyway, we certainly hadn't told the Chief Minister. And I got Stuart in, and I told Stuart what we were doing, and it was almost as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He says, "I can't believe," he says, "you've got a problem because the police are not trusted by abused people. You're not trusted. There's no way they will trust you." And I said, "Well, we'll get round that. We'll get round that." I said, "But in the meantime, it's vitally important for the integrity of our investigation, and also it's vitally important for my well-being that you do not mention a word of this until we go public tomorrow. Because if the Chief Minister finds out that I've had you in, if the government find out that I've had you in and I'm telling you," because he had been sacked by this time, he was no longer in government. I says, "Then my head will get chopped." I says, "So you must not say anything. You've got to be quiet." He says, "Oh yeah, no problem. And off he went. Within an hour, it was on the media. He'd gone in he'd gone in and told the media that Lenny Harper, the deputy chief, was investigating this, and this time he believed that the police would act. It was all over the Jersey media within minutes.
Yeah.
And the balloon went up, and this was to be a recurring problem with Stuart. His motives were brilliant. He had the strongest motives. His courage was indescribable, but he was very focused in what he was doing, and he didn't look at the wider picture very often. And the way he put things could often just fan the flames, you know. And this was one occasion. The next morning, Graham and I were in the chief minister's office getting slammed and being told to drop the investigation, and being told to stop calling people victims when nobody had been charged yet, and to stop this. And we were warned that we would bring down the government. And we said, well, that's not our responsibility. You know, we're police officers. So that was so what we did was the next day we did a press conference. We emphasized that this was a new police regime. We knew we couldn't use the Jersey Social Services because there was just no trust whatsoever, and too many of them were involved. Some of them were withholding files from us and refusing to hand over documents, and same as we had experience with the Sea Cadets. And
that's at Victoria College, that abuse.
Yeah, there was Victoria College was another example, and then the Jersey Sea Cadets, where the head of the Sea Cadets we arrested him and found pornographic images of children on his computer. And the problems I had to go to the UK and enter into a subterfuge with the Royal Navy to have a ship docked off Jersey on Remembrance Sunday, and then he swept into I just happened by accident to be in there, prearranged, and the commander of the Royal Navy, who was very much on side with us, came into the headquarters and ordered them to hand over the files there and then, so that they didn't have a chance to destroy them. So we were having to, you know, we'd gone to the head judge in the island to try and get a warrant to seize the documents at the Sea Cadets, and it was refused. They just wouldn't allow us. They refused as a warrant. So we were facing obstruction all over the place. And so then we issued this phone number where abused victims could come in, and we just weren't expecting the response. You know, we were a small police force. We had a small team on this inquiry, and within hours we had over 100 victims phoning in and saying, I was abused here, I was abused. And it was just spiraling way beyond what we could cope with very early on, which was then why we had to go out and bring officers in from the UK. They were mainly children from what you would call working class families, many of whom had got themselves in trouble when they were young and had just been dumped at various care homes. Haute de la Garenne was obviously the main one. They'd just been dumped at these homes, and there was it was just it wasn't so much that it was an organised ring of paedophiles. It was just the accepted thing that was done. They would hire boys out to the yachting fraternity, and they had perverts amongst the yachting fraternity in Jersey who would take boys out ostensibly on day trips on boats, but would end up sexually assaulting them when on the boats. And it was mainly, as I say, from the working class community. There were also a lot of children being brought across from the UK who were being dumped into these homes. Record keeping was abysmal, because although if somebody was in there long term, there would be a record of them. Very often, if a child was misbehaving at home in Jersey, in one of the old Jersey families, they would call the honorary police. The honorary police would take them away for the weekend and lock them up in Haute de la Garenne for the weekend. Some of them were undoubtedly out of control, and but not all of them. You know, not all of them. If they stayed out late and the parents thought they needed a lesson, they went into Haute de la Garenne for a couple of days, and they were being abused in there. And of course, they would get out and they would complain, and just nobody believed them. It was just dismissed. The police laughed them off. And Well, we had to bring the NSPCC across from London because we couldn't use the social services in Jersey. They just weren't trusted. It was all coming home to roost then when the abuse inquiry started, and it was only then that I started sort of putting the strings together and realizing just what we'd got ourselves into, that the corruption which had led on and into the firearms and now it was the very same people that we were having to battle with. Yes, I mean, right from the outset, I mean, they tried to portray the fact that we went into Hotel Laguna to search it on a whim, but in reality, we went across the UK and had a meeting with the top homicide experts in the UK and laid out everything to them, and they recommended that we go in and do an exploratory dig of the site with the cadaver dogs who became very famous in the Madeleine McCann inquiry, and do it with them. And so we went in there and strictly controlled and coordinated by the homicide working group in the UK. And the first day we were in there, 2 or 3 politicians turned up demanding access. And we chased them off and said, go away, this is a crime scene, potential crime scene, disappear. But they weren't happy. And they so then eventually the dog, Eddie, and hoist my colours to the mast here right away. I was a huge fan. I expect that poor old Eddie has gone into doggy heaven now. But I was huge fans of these dogs. I put these dogs through incredible tests. The handler had told me that he had helped excavate bodies from the Battle of the Little Bighorn, that the dog had detected cavalry, 7th Cavalry remains from the site of the Battle of the Little Bighorn. And one of the tests that I ran this cadaver dog through was my anthropologist had been on holiday in Egypt, and she'd brought back a tiny little amount of grain of sand from the inside of one of the skeletons that she'd unearthed. And we took it to a large beach in Jersey, and we buried this little container. It was about maybe an inch high. We buried it and set the dog off. The dog found it within a minute. The dog was incredible. And he couldn't, the handler of the dog, the owner of the dog, went at pains to keep telling us, and he said this was the difference between us and the Portuguese police. He said the dog can tell you what questions to ask, but he can't give you the answers. You have to work the answers out. And he says the dog gave the Portuguese police the questions to ask, but the Portuguese police thought those were the answers. And whereas the dog was telling us that there were human remains had been in here, but the dog couldn't tell us how they'd got there, whether they were murdered or not.
Yeah.
We knew that we eventually established that they'd certainly been illegally buried, but we could never ever say. So when we found, it was a dog that discovered the first piece of bone, which became infamous. It was known as, I think, Jar 6, named after the anthropologist J.A.R. Julie Russell. What's the name of the actress? Julia Roberts. Julie Roberts. And I can't remember whether she was Julie or Julia, but I keep getting the two of them mixed up in name ways. But she's a world-renowned pathologist, absolutely world-renowned. She's been involved in some of the most difficult murder cases, and she was of the opinion there and then that this was a piece of a child's skull. Now, we found out a couple of days later that because of where we'd found it and the excavation, that it wasn't going to be fitting in with our inquiry. So we immediately ruled it out. But by then it had gone off for examination. And as a Sheffield professor said, anthropologists like her does not make a silly mistake like that. And it went off. And the first reports we got back from the laboratory were that they had found a significant amount of collagen in this bone. Now, collagen is only found in mammals. It's not found in objects like wood or coconut or anything else. It's only found in mammals, including humans. And the anthropologist was convinced when we sent this off that this was a piece of a human juvenile skull. And the lab that were supposed to carbon date it got it in Oxford, and they found collagen. They sent us emails saying they'd found collagen in it, and then they sent it somewhere else, but they didn't record any of its movements. And then all of a sudden, it comes back to the anthropologist, who looks at it and says, "This has changed shape, changed texture, changed color. I can't say anymore what it is." And
the other people were calling it coconut, weren't they?
Coconut, yeah. And somebody had some technician who wasn't qualified to decide what it was says it looks like a piece of coconut to me. And so we tried to trace back to where it had been, but they didn't have any records of. So even if it had been the most vital piece of evidence in the world, we couldn't have used it because there was no record of its transmission. Once it left us and went to this lab, there was just, and the pathologist, now the anthropologist said it's changed shape, texture, and color, but that never appeared anywhere in subsequent. It was just accepted that this was a piece of coconut, and the myth of the coconut was born, even though collagen had been found in it. The myth of the coconut was born. Now we don't know. I can't say whether it was the same piece that came back or not, or whether it was switched. I just know that there's no way to prove that was we couldn't use it in evidence, even though we'd ruled it out. If we hadn't ruled it out, if this was evidence that would convict somebody of a murder, we wouldn't have been able to use it because the chain of evidence had been not only broken, it had just been destroyed.
And they found the collagen, which should have allowed them to carbon date it. But then the collagen mysteriously disappeared. That was a bizarre section of the Storyville where, and I mean, why would the head of a laboratory call in a
journalist
denier of child abuse who had testified on behalf of Frank Beck, the Leicestershire care home rapist, and had also testified. He called the North Wales abuse inquiry a huge witch hunt by the police. And it turned out, of course, that it was anything but a huge witch hunt by the police. They hadn't done the investigation as thoroughly as they should have done. So why would the head of the laboratory call in someone like that? It was part of this surreal world that we were living in. Frank Walker and his wife came up to Haute de la Garonne, and we took him on a tour around the site, showed him the cellars where everything had been found, and he was tutting and how horrific it was, and we were going to have his full support and all the rest of it. And we knew, even as we were standing talking to him, that behind the scenes he was briefing against us. And
yes.
And he's standing there, and then when they denied that the cellars even existed, and the guy had stood looking down into them. He stood looking down into them. It was bizarre, surreal. All along we were saying, this is not. We're not saying there's been murders, but we have to treat it as a potential homicide scene. And they were accusing us of saying this is murder. And Graham makes a very telling point in his statement that Wiltshire employed 2 police officers full time to go through every one of my media interviews, and they came out at the end of the day and saying no. At no stage did Lenny Harper say that there had been murders. He kept saying this is a potential homicide scene. But that statement was that statement disappeared from the Wiltshire file, just gone, as if the 2 officers had never ever been employed on that task. And the Jersey government continued to say, you said there were murders. And I said, no, I didn't. But, it's
Frank Walker basically said that they wanted to drive Graham Power out. He slipped, and he would say, "Oh yeah, we did want to get rid of him. Oh well, yeah, we did." So when you say evidence of crushing others, he basically admitted it right on camera. It's insane, but he did.
Yeah, right. Okay. The people involved are the Chief Minister of the time, Frank Walker, the Home Affairs Minister, Andrew Lewis, and assisted by the chief executive, Bill Ogley, at the time. They had been meeting and trying to find a basis for suspension. They'd taken legal advice from both the Attorney General and the Solicitor General, who both provided legal advice, which in both cases said, you can't do this. You know, you have no legal basis for doing this. This becomes a little bit unpleasant because the deputy, we'd found a deputy, he wasn't appointed by me, who was going to take over from me. I was in the transition period. And somehow the guy who was going to take over from me was persuaded to say he'd seen a review report from Metropolitan Police, which was too confidential to share with the politicians, but it was critical of the inquiry. And he wasn't very impressed with the way I was leading the force anyway, and thought he could do a much better job. And that letter was used as the basis for the suspension. The Committee of Inquiry found that Andrew Lewis lied by saying he'd seen a report from the Metropolitan Police. He hadn't. And the Metro said no such report ever existed. But the fact is I was suspended, and the guy who was my appointed successor was within 24 hours was sitting in my chair drawing my salary. I spent 12 months on a freedom of information case representing myself, because I wanted to know, can I have the evidence, the technical evidence as to when the suspension notices are actually created? Of course, they were created in advance. They say they got a report or evidence on a particular day and decided to suspend, etc., etc. That was their story, but it was lies, because they'd taken the decision in advance, then sent some hapless fool to find something. I think revenge was part of the motive, because Firstly, I'd allowed the inquiry to run, and I'd protected it against attempts to shut it down. And also, I got in a confrontation with Frank Walker over a previous matter. Well, two or three things where I'd refused to toe the party line. I'd refused to get involved in the plot to sack Senator Stuart Sibley, who was an advocate for abused children and was giving the Jersey government a lot. He was sacked as health minister, and I was put under a lot of pressure to throw in my lot with that, say that he was demoralising staff and the criticism was unwarranted and so on. I wasn't having any of that, and I walked out of a meeting where I was under pressure to do that. Another occasion was when I just happened to be present when he was clearly trying to bully in an appalling way Wendy Kinnard, who was the Home Affairs Minister, and who was the only person who had authority over me, and which frustrated the Chief Minister. And he was behaving in an awful way towards her. She was very upset. You know, if I was wanting to do an interview to convince people that I had the interests of the common people in heart, it sort of looks like a penthouse apartment overlooking the sea, that it might not be the setting I'd have chosen to do it. But well, he says, I didn't know about the abuse. Nobody told me. I find it horrific. Well, the judge says, because you weren't interested, Frank, actually. You had no interest at all. And when people tried to draw to your attention, you moved on to other things. You weren't interested. And, you know, you wonder if in fact, he'd been presiding over a government which had presided over institutionalised historic abuse of law, and he'd been in senior positions of a Jersey government for ages. It's been found by eminent legal authorities that my suspension was based on false evidence, that it was against legal advice. I don't have to refight that battle. I just don't know. Of course not. Yeah. But it is symptomatic of the vengeance thing. Let's go back to the conversation I've had with others who said they'll get you in the end. You know what I mean? They'll find some way of getting you, because they want to set an example of this is what. And people would stop me in the street afterwards, firstly expressing support. You know, I couldn't walk down the street without people want to shake my hand and say, you fine fellow and all that. But say, look, think if they can do that to you, what can they do to us? That is a thing that people repeatedly said. It's an example, because I had passed my retirement date. I'd agreed to stay on to do a handover. The rules were clear. All they had to do was say, we consider the handover to be complete. You should now leave. They spent millions of taxpayers' money on investigations that came to nothing. And my cost, I was suspended nearly 2 years on a chief constable's salary with my pension topped up. That's the Jersey taxpayers paying for that. And, you know, I'm getting a chief constable's pay for sitting on the beach. It's just mad, but they do that because they just wanted to see it as some sort, and to impose a rule of silence. As long as I was suspended, they could say you're not allowed to talk to the media. Yes, well, I'd been handing over as deputy, but he might have decided that the handover had gone for long enough because he colluded with the people who were wanting to suspend me. He didn't last.
He didn't last, did you say?
No, he didn't last. He left.
Who was that?
David Walkup. If you study his words at the press conference, he refers to the abuse inquiry, but he always refers to it in the past tense. He doesn't say, and now I'm putting the lid on it, but he presents it as something, an episode which is through. And the number of reports, and I mean, people, again, I'd be stopped in the street by, for instance, a detective on the inquiry would say, look, don't tell anyone I told you, but since you've been suspended, we've just been fielding calls from victims and witnesses saying, come on, if you can do that to the chief, what are you going to do to me? I don't think I want to go through with this. You know, they might do something terrible to me. Yeah, it did sort of fizzle out. No, I mean, I don't know the full story about him leaving, but I do know that a lot of Jersey people turned against him when it came out what his part in it had been. And I've been told, I'm sure it's true, but his landlord asked him to leave his house. And you know, that must have been sort of, he would have to think whether he really wanted to live with what he'd done.
Well, I started in 2005,
Right.
Trevor started a term after me in 2008. And I think for me, it was when I brought two propositions. One was to get rid of the dual role of the bailiff, which as currently still is. He is the head of the judiciary and Speaker of the Parliament, or head of the state. And the second one, I think, is probably more profound, was the vote of no confidence I brought in the then bailiff in 2008, which was to Philip Balash. And that was regarding his behaviour when he was Attorney General a few years before that, in allowing a convicted paedophile to continually work as an honorary police officer, which at the time he was titular head of, and he allowed this person to continue, and this person went on to abuse young women in his office. After that, a few months after that vote, there was a law passed in which people standing for election were not allowed to help disabled people and vulnerable people fill in applications for a postal vote to be put on the register for postal vote. And so that was passed. And during that debate, I said, this is wrong. It's never been done before. It was, I believe, a political move to stop because the party I was involved with was actually doing a lot of these.
Very active, weren't they, in knocking on people's doors, which traditionally a lot of the wealthier candidates haven't had to bother around, because you could spend what you liked on campaigns, where we were sort of grassroots party, so we were knocking on doors. And the interesting thing is that they changed the law in the middle of the election. So in Jersey, you had senators who stood on an island-wide mandate. Now, they were still allowed to do this because this law wasn't brought in. But when it got to the deputies, where most of the party were standing, they brought it in for that. And all this was doing, as Shona says, was to, if you were vulnerable or you were stuck in your own home, I would help you complete a form and perhaps deliver it to say, can I please have a postal vote because I can't get to it. It's not illegal anywhere in the Commonwealth when we looked into it. I mean, it was quite shocking, really. That it was to limit. The sad thing about it is it wasn't just to get at the people who were helping these people. It was just to make sure those people who would vote for them wouldn't. They couldn't.
We stood up and said we weren't going to abide by this law because in actual fact the states of Jersey were in contravention of the human rights law which they were signed up to with their affiliation to the UK in approving that. So that's the first thing. But what happened to us was that although there were other candidates and then sitting states members who had actually done the same thing as us. It was only myself and my other colleague, Jeff Southern, who were prosecuted and pursued initially by the police. And it went to the magistrates' court, but it was sort of too much public interest. So it went to the Royal Court, which is the top court in Jersey. It was made a big thing of by the media. And we were subsequently prosecuted. But in that part of my evidence, one of the people who gave the evidence, and these people were pressured by the police. And I remember going to, when I was canvassing, and I went to one of these people, and I didn't know at the time, and she wouldn't answer her door. Eventually she answered her door, and she told me what was happening, and she was physically shaking. And this person was somebody who had learning difficulties as well. So they went for this person, vulnerable person. And the other person actually gave evidence and said, if it wasn't for Shona Pittman helping me with that form, I wouldn't have voted. And he actually said that the police pressured him.
It was being portrayed as if party, which was the Jersey Democratic Alliance, we were going around writing crosses next to our names on a ballot slip. Well, the ballot slips haven't been issued yet. This is just a form saying, please, sir, may I have a postal vote? But it was spun completely differently in the media. We knew that there were other people who'd done the same but weren't prosecuted. The bailiff's, former bailiff's brother, who was then Attorney General, he denied that there was anyone else who'd done it, but he'd forgotten. He'd actually sent Shona an email admitting that there was at least another person. So I was able to stand up in the States with this. And then he suddenly, they suddenly recall, it's a great legal term, which you'll know. Oh, now I recall,
But there was more than one person. There was about 5 others that we knew of. And 2 of them had been re-elected back in the States. So.
But of course, they were taken to court. It was portrayed, it was on the front of the papers, it was the media stories and the TV. And it came down to being, Shona had the choice of being fined. I think it was £2,000 for every person they'd helped, or going to prison.
I paid the fine.
But I have to say, Shona wanted to go to prison, and I was concerned about the impact that could have on our lives. So it was me really who pressured her. And I deeply regret that. It was a mistake, because I think people could see going to prison for 6 months for helping an elderly disabled person receive a postal vote is pretty shocking to me.
I think it made me more determined to question the Crown officers and.
Well, at the same time, of course, you had the child abuse scandal breaking, and former Senator Stuart Siveraid really started that ball rolling when he was health minister, when things were being brought to his attention. Unbeknownst, you had Graham Power and Lenny Harper, the senior police officers in the island. They were carrying out their own inquiries, because as this was getting worse and worse, and you know, for a long time, the world's media were camped in the Royal Square. It was Jersey had never seen anything like it. You know, you'd have like Sky Van and all these people. And because we were asking questions, most politicians just wanted it to go away. This was bad for Jersey's image. Finance certainly didn't want us talking about child abuse. So the fact that we kept talking and kept asking questions, I think that year there was a record number of propositions and questions, which meant the state went on longer each week. So it was an irritant, and it was an irritant that just didn't go away.
I mean, our defamation case started. Well, we that's when we, after the election, we started. We went to our lawyers about the advert in the Jersey Evening Post.
Well, it was sort of running concurrently, because that was autumn 2008. Well, a lot of this is coming to a head, and just after I'd got elected, I think I hadn't actually been sworn in yet, or maybe I had just been, but the local newspaper ran a big page of cartoons. All of them were just funny little things, but apart from us, like, we were both wrapped in a election rosette made out of banknotes, smirking at each other, with me saying to Shona, "Hey, 4 times the salary, darling." So we'd done a social justice platform. Now, I wasn't getting 4 times the salary. Actually, I took a pay cut of about $5,000 to go into politics, plus lost, you know, I had to give up my pension and everything. So it was demonstrably untrue. But we decided that we had to take this to court at the same time, because it was very damaging to, you know, we're preaching social justice and how we're just standing to fight for people. And then people see this wrapped in banknotes. I mean, so this was going on. They kept it running. It took, when did it go to court? It took till 2012 to get it to court. So for 4 years. So throughout this time, we had this court case, which was racking up more money for us to employ a lawyer. That was constant, and the battle being fought to get the care inquiry was going on. I mean, I was eventually the chair of a scrutiny select committee that was to look into that, how it had been reported, Operation Rectangle, which was run by Lenny Harper.
Yeah.
He was getting crucified in the media, him and Graham Power, that they wasted money, etc., etc. Now, they actually tried to remove me as chairman of the Home Affairs Minister, wanted me removed from chairing that select committee. And really what it came down to is the fact I'd voiced a contrary opinion to his, which was not, we all go by the evidence that we see. So he couldn't get me removed. So obviously that was even more in the media limelight, because we were interviewing people, we were calling people in. It was just dragging people over the coals to try and get them to be what should have been quite honest. You know, this needs to be cleared up. We need some answers. Yeah, I mean, I was put forward for Education Minister. Now, there were 3 people up for it. I was the only professional educator standing, so you might think I'd have a decent chance. I was up against a guy nice guy actually, but who I think he was a farmer, and another guy who ran a landscape gardening business. Now, I came 3rd out of 3. And to be fair to the sitting minister, he told me that, he said, I have to say that my wife listened to the debate, to our speeches and all the questions, and she said that you gave my father the most informed speech and answered the questions the best. Well, I would, because that was my background. So like Jonah says, it's constantly, you're an irritant, so you'll be kept down. We don't want this sort of dissenting voice. While this was all going on and the court case was finally coming to court, I mean, we had a bullet put through our letterbox with a nice threatening note attached that the next one might be delivered by gun. I mean, I never told Sharon about that at the time. I just kept it. I can remember the former planning minister, because I'd questioned there was rumours about a guy in Jersey with meant to be arms dealing. So I asked questions about it, and he said to me afterwards, well, you're very brave, but it's not much point being brave if you wind up dead. And I just thought that was a joke, you know. But then after we got the bullet, you think, well, you know, is it a joke?
2013, our court case came to an end, and we lost. 2012, we lost the case, and which, looking back, it was no surprise. I mean, I think we went in naively thinking we'd still get some justice, and rightly so. You know, this is our home, and this is where we brought up. I think your judiciary, now, despite the past, that you know, there's going to be an element of justice brought into it. But,
yeah, we lost the case, and it was decided, let's say, by these two lay judges.
Within about 10 minutes, it was decided, and it turned out that one of the lay judges, and this is evidence as well in two official reports which are public, but they're not. A lot of people don't know. They're not widely known, and this. One of the judges had formerly worked at the Victoria College, and he'd been a teacher. And at the time, one time during, there had been a child abuse going on, and a child had come to him and complained about the abuse, and he basically.
He literally said, according to the young person, he made a statement to the police about this. We learned later that he'd literally been bullied into silence. When you had the care inquiry, which we helped bring about, took a lot of time to do, and eventually that cost about £24 million. A police officer came forward, a former police officer. Now, he'd been the investigating officer at Victoria College. And he highlighted the fact how they had wanted to prosecute this juror, and how they were blocked. And he said, it's in his evidence, the care inquiry, that what was stressed to them was that no juror had ever been prosecuted for anything. A few years later, the other Balash, William Balash, actually brought this guy out of retirement. And what did he do? He sat him on one of the most infamous child abuse cases that Jersey's ever had, the Barrett case. So he's brought out of retirement, this guy, who the police had wanted to prosecute for covering child abuse, and he was placed to sit as a juror on another child abuse case. Well, this is the thing. If we'd known that such a person, let's be honest, we were two of only perhaps 5 or 6 politicians who stood up for the abuse survivors, and who's deciding our case but a guy who we would later learn the police had wanted to prosecute for what he'd done. And it goes right back. The person who'd been Attorney General when this guy was, the police wanted to prosecute him, was a guy called Michael Burt, Sir Michael Burt. He was Attorney General. And the bailiff was Sir Philip Balash. When you get to our court case all those years later in 2012, who appointed this guy to sit on our case but Sir Michael Burt, who was now bailiff? So we can't say he didn't know about this Juror Act. But of course, we didn't know all this information when we went to court. It was only about a month later that people got in touch with our lawyer and ourselves. And initially they said, well, this guy, because he's a juror, he's also got a friendship with another juror who was a very high up figure on the board of directors, I think, with the newspaper who published this cartoon. So to us initially think, well, that's a conflict of relationship. If you could actually prove that they've been going to dinner at each other's homes. We didn't know about his real involvement in the Victoria College scandal. Because when we did start to learn about this, we think, well, this has got to be, we've got to appeal against this. And you meet another sort of wall of the way Jersey works, because the appeal court in Jersey, although it's appointed in Jersey, it's actually, well, it's not appointed. They choose who they want, and then it's rubber stamped from England, the Queen. Because we lost the appeal, which meant we had massive debts. Yeah, well, we obviously had huge costs for our own lawyer, but then you had 2 people who we'd had to take to court, because we had to take the Evening Post, the newspaper, who'd run the advert, and we had to take to court the person who had commissioned the cartoon. So that was two people, you know, so it was massive. I think we were naive to think that we could ever receive justice just because we were clearly right.
What happened afterwards was that the Viscount's department, which had been nice to us up until this point, they're part of their department of the judiciary. And what they did, unbeknown to us, and I can't remember exactly, we found out at the very last minute from them, I believe it was an email, that they'd given the list of our debtors to the local channel, the local television station, the channel television. And in that was our tax, what we owed on income tax.
Just like any other normal person.
That is actually illegal to do that. And so what they were doing, why they did it was to give the impression, I think, sending out to the media, was giving it another impression. Actually,
irresponsible.
Yeah, irresponsible with our money.
Oh.
So this was also about ruining our reputation even further after the case. You know, that they rubbished the case first, saying it was about freedom of speech of the press, and then it was nothing really, and then it was about a financial situation, and this is with, you know, Jersey, as we've already said, there's lots of connections there. You know, the Jersey Evening Post used to be owned by the former Chief Minister, and Channel Television. Once we actually met a couple of ministers, senior ministers, actually having drinks in a hotel, and we actually by accident came across that, having drinks with the husband of the director of Channel Television. So there's lots of links there, and they do a very good job in portraying lefties, vociferous lefties, as something other than what they really are. You know, people who care about what they're doing. And
I think what puts this in perspective is they actually done a lead program on the news, and it's called the Pittman Files, and that's what they did. They highlighted all. Now, we had no debts apart from income tax we had to pay that year, like most people, you know. So we weren't reckless with our money. And yet, when I tackled the Viscount about it, well, he wouldn't speak to me himself, so it was one of his minions. But they said, "Oh, it'd all just been a mistake." So there's no action taken against Channel Television for it, you know. So you're sitting there, you've already seen this done to you, which is obviously so corrupt, and then you're splashed across on a lead story, the Pittman Files, with all. They'd even highlighted the fact that Shona had missed, I think it was an Institute of Directors dinner, so they claimed for £25 off her. It's really, you've got to consider how complicit the UK authorities, because, you know, the UK they should intervene on ensuring good governance and the law and the rule of law and order. Now, when all this had happened to us, I actually got through to the Justice Minister at the time in the UK, who was then Tom McNally, and I highlighted this. You know, it must have been a quiet day, because he actually answered his own phone, which I didn't expect. And I said, "Have you received our letter?" First he denied he had, but then he went away, came back, and he had our letter. So we'd set out all that we've been talking about. And he said, "Well, I'll have to look into it, then I'll get back to you." When we got a letter from Lord McNally, I think he is now, I may be wrong on that, but what he said in his letter was that, unfortunately, all I can do is refer you back to Jersey's bailiff, because we'd had our court case, lost it, we'd appealed locally and lost it. The UK then declined to intervene, which is what Lord McNally had done. Because when we put a huge file, must have been about 7 inches thick, to Strasbourg, because that's the next stage, and you know it'd take years. But then you find out from Strasbourg that actually they won't even look at it, because you've not completed the domestic cycle, because the UK won't intervene. So where do you go? I mean, unless you're a multi-millionaire with deep pockets, that's the end of the story. And when I finally went back in 2018, I think, for the bankruptcy to be lifted, funny enough, who presided over but William Ballash. William Ballash again. And he actually tried to stop the Viscount lifting our bankruptcy. Now, he had no grounds because we'd gone along with everything. And he actually asked the Viscount, have I got any means that I can stop this? And the Viscount said, well, no, they've adhered to everything that's been asked of them. It's quite funny, really, because you're not allowed to speak in these hearings, apparently. But I insisted. I said to the Viscount, well, no, I am speaking. And I stood up and I said, well, what do you wish to say, Mr. Pittman? I said, well, I just want to give the court a chance to apologise for the corruption that has been carried out to us, which obviously he didn't take very well. And he said, well, why are you saying this? You've got no evidence. And of course, I actually had a copy of the police officer's statement from the care inquiry. So he had to go in and look at it and read it. And then he said, oh, it's just the word of one man, Mr. Pittman. It counts for very little. You know, I was tempted to say, actually, it isn't one person, is it, bailiff? It's two, because you've got the child who's complained about being abused, and you've got the police officer who took the statement. And yeah, that counts for very little. And it's funny when you mentioned lawyers earlier, because I happened to chat to a lawyer I knew to a small degree that day. And I showed him the statement from the police officer, which he'd never seen. And he says, I find it absolutely shocking, but not surprising. But he said, you've got to understand that it's more than my job's worth to say anything about it.
For me, I mean, I went into politics hoping to be involved in changing policy, you know, for the best, and I couldn't be part of that because of my who I was, you know.
Yeah, and that's probably the thing that's saved us, really. We know we did the right thing, you know. It is Neil from Voice for Children always says, you know, we know at the end of the day we were on the right side.
For me, I think that I've lived my principles, and I'm very proud of them, and I'm very proud of Trevor. And certainly it's done lots of good as well.
Yeah, I mean, we did. People can disagree with your politics, whether you're right or left, and that's fine. But we were, as we said we would be.
I think I would rather be here and have done what I've gone through, what I've gone through, and lost what I've lost, than still be in the States and living in fear and deference of these Crown officers, which is what holds a lot of people, a lot of politicians back in questioning them. And at the end of the day, you know, it's like if people got together more, if more politicians got together, and a substantial group of them saying, no, you cannot, this cannot happen. Also, the dual role has to go. We're going to question you. And also, we're going to have a Minister for Justice, which attempts have been tried at getting one, but it hasn't happened. And if those things happen, we wouldn't have this. But it's down to politicians. They're elected by the public, but they're not questioning these Crown officers.
Yeah, we've tried to do the right thing, you know, and it started out doing the right thing for other people. We've had to try and do the right thing for ourselves. But yeah, it's been difficult, but we're still here.
And it was 2011 that I was traveling from the US to Jersey, and you have to pass through UK airport on the way to Jersey. There's no direct flight between like New York City and Jersey. And that was where I was detained, questioned, and it was a very misleading, nasty process because they made it sound like they just want to ask me a couple of questions, but they locked me in a room in the basement for over 12 hours, which is a legal limit, and tried to interrogate me, tried to go through all my things. It was very confrontational and hostile. And most of the time I was down there, they just had me locked up in a room without speaking to me. The first thing they wanted to do was go through my luggage, which to me felt like a fishing expedition because I'd never had an issue with my visa. I'd never had an issue traveling. I have a completely clean record of clean travel record, clean background, no crime, etc. I was just a young woman going on a writing research trip. So I didn't understand what on earth they would want to lock me up for. And they wouldn't tell me. I was being treated as a person of interest. I was deported, and I was sent a letter saying I would be banned from entering not just the United Kingdom, but the Channel Islands and Jersey for the next 2 years. And it turned out they were surveilling me. He got some information from immigration saying that they had been watching me and filing reports on me. So that was a little surprising because, again, a journalist doesn't look at themselves that way.
No.
Most journalists, I'm sure they're very, very arrogant, self-aggrandized journalists who think that they're that important that someone would surveil them. But I found it a little much.
I always come back to the Wizard of Oz. At the end of Wizard of Oz, they've gone along the yellow brick road, and all it took was for little Toto to go behind the curtain, pull it back, and there he was, the guy pulling these levers, and that's all it is. You've got to just pull the curtain back and just see who's pulling the levers. It's all illusion. It's like a big illusion. It's big. In Jersey, it's just a small people. To control the paper, you just need the editor on board, and then he controls, what goes out. It's very simply done at BBC or Channel ITV. It's all almost like a group think. It's very easy to control what goes out.
Or you can't deny things have improved, and there is a substantial effort going into maintaining a high standard of children's services in the island. People are working hard. Some good people are working hard. Some people have walked away from it saying, no, this isn't moving fast enough. And they haven't necessarily followed up from the Committee of Inquiry, which recommended that the recommendations of the Committee of Inquiry be subject to an action plan, a SMART plan, we would call it in business, and that regular reporting on progress. And so that is a bit lax. But there's always, of course, resourcing issues and priorities and so on. I think you find better, more capable people running things now than you did in my time.
What's happening live right now to children on the island is definitely something that's very tricky, because they are one of the tricky things, as about children's services, is in the process of protecting children, they're also kind of making it impossible for anyone to really observe whether or not the children are being treated well. For me, the hardest part is there's too many people who are still in immediate ongoing crisis on the island. And it's not just survivors of abuse, it's anyone who's vulnerable, whether it's an elderly person or somebody who doesn't maybe have enough money and they're finding themselves in a terrible situation. One man I interviewed he was a witness of some pretty horrific stuff at Hot Deli Garden. He's not a survivor of abuse, but he saw several things that are impossible for anyone to dismiss. And he told me he did not want to come forward because he said, in his estimation, the Jersey government will destroy your life. People talk about, I never had a problem. Then I reported this thing I saw, and suddenly the police are pulling them over to check their, driver's license. The police are knocking on their door. Come down. We have some questions. Why? Oh, there's somebody complained about you. Somebody else, another person on the island who has come forward quite a bit, immediately not only was harassed at his job, but his wife was getting harassed, like at her job. And it's a small island. It's also very, very wealthy. They actually do have the resources to single people out and really frighten them, frankly.
That there was a few scapegoats, a few lambs thrown to the lions, lambs to the slaughter idea to say, well, look, we do take this child abuse seriously over here. Here's some prosecutions. But they were, in the bigger scheme of things, there's some, again, I'm not condoning what any of these people did. They all deserve to be prosecuted, every single one of them. But what about the ones who enabled it? What about the ones who covered it up? Or, what about the ones that are perpetrators themselves? All these people are still around, you know. And again, which brings us on to the Jimmy Savile sketch here, sort of thing, because when Jimmy Savile was a regular visitor to Jersey and Britain's most prolific paedophile. Now, of course, he was coming to Jersey on a regular basis. Now, in this, what I've learned in these paedophile rings, a paedophile doesn't think, right, I'm going to go to with such a high profile as Jimmy Savile. Doesn't think, well, I'm going to go to Jersey and hope I get lucky, for want of a better expression, and, you know, hopefully abuse a child. Well, all this is put in place for these paedophiles before they get here. So my question is, who are these people? Who are these people that looked after and catered for Jimmy Savile when he was coming over here? They're still around. Where are they? But this question has never, ever been asked by, you know.